welcome to Flip the Script, Season 2, Episode 4, How to Keep Your Reps Motivated, Accountable, and Away from Blaming It All on COVID. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a favor, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck so we can follow along at each step of the way. And also that I can gate you. Let's go ahead and jump in. So why don't we start with a bit of an agenda? The guy who's filming this is crunching so loudly for anyone that's watching. First, motivation. How do we motivate? Through 5 different pieces. Motivating through training, motivating through enablement, motivating through cross-collaboration, motivating through positives or spiffs, motivating through negatives or repercussions. We're then going to go to accountability, how to keep our reps accountable during something like COVID. So accountable to the inputs, accountable to the outputs, and accountable through Herculean effort. And then number 3, away from blaming everything on COVID. So there are going to be some ramifications, of course, to COVID. The pandemic has affected us in a way that we didn't foresee coming. However, how do we get our reps out of that mindset where they're blaming everything on it so that it cripples their inputs and it cripples their outputs as a result? So let's start with motivation. Motivation, I have typically seen in a couple of different ways where people say like, okay, maybe this is a visibility issue. Maybe this is something where we're rah, rah, rah. Maybe the CEO should just like come to the front lines and say, you guys are so important. And I really, even though I make $1 billion more than you, I definitely value the guys in the trenches. That speech is over. No one buys it anymore. So we need to find what really at their core motivates our reps and how do we push the gas on that. So number 1 is starting through motivating through enablement. So motivating through enablement is basically how do I enable my reps to be bigger, badder, more lethal than before through some kind of medium so that I can get them to be motivated during a time like this because I'm really in the trenches with them by giving them a supply. So number 1, adding push-pull into sequences. If you want to hear more about the push-pull sequence, if you go into Silver Bullet Central, episode 1, I go into more of that. But basically, it's a way on the back end of your email to go ahead and instead of in the front line of your email saying, I hope you're staying safe during these uncertain times and that your kids are okay and etc., causing pattern recognition and them to see you as a little bit ingenuine, you want to throw that line on the back end and basically after you say the reason for my outreach is I saw you wrote this article and you tie it and hook it to your value prop and stick the landing in the CTA asking for Wednesday at 2 to unpack the above content. On the back end, you can give them one last line of reprieve of either way. I love the articles, keep the good stuff coming, big fan of your team, and hope you're staying safe with everything going on in the world. So that is a good place to mention COVID, number 1, but also to enable your prospects to feel like in any case scenario, you know what's going on and you're there for them either way and you value them either way. So TLDR, how you can motivate your reps through enabling them with that is I reworked all of my sequences and outreach to reflect that. Instead of just telling reps to say that near the end, I actually put it as a template line. They could, reselect and choose out the different pieces for personalization. Instead of saying, keep the good articles coming, if there wasn't an article, they could say, keep the good engaged content coming or, keep the good headlines coming or love what, Drift is up to. But essentially, they can personalize it, but I put it in there as a template of like, this is where you're going to mention COVID. Because if you mention COVID, people think you're monetizing a pandemic or it's pattern recognition if it has nothing to do with your product. If you don't mention COVID, people think that you essentially are insensitive and not self-aware. So you want to put it into the last line in the push-pull sequence. And basically, if you can enable your reps by writing that in, then it helps them more than ever before. Number 2, enable them to know how to multi-thread to a CFO. CFOs are now our purchaser. They are looking for whether something is really, really worth it in a time like this because they're scaling back purchases and they're being more stringent than they ever have before out of fear. And it makes sense. They don't know what's coming up. They, are scared to spend budget or expend on unnecessary spend. Talk to a girl who's launching a business during it. Just kidding. But our CFO is our new buyer, and you want to enable your reps by teaching them how to multi-thread to the CFO. So from my perspective, one of the core things you can do as a leader is move all of the list cleaning, list building, the who and the what, etc., out of your reps' way by list building for them, and then also enabling them by having a perspective, putting your neck out on the line of how you should handle an objection, or how you should have that cold calling line, or how you should respond to X, Y, and Z, and then holding yourself accountable to the result of that, and holding them accountable to the deployment of that and the level of deployment of that. Number 3, you can pivot your buyer persona. I would suggest doing so. If you want more on that, go to season 2, episode 6, where I talk about how you can pivot your buyer persona. But I would pivot the buyer persona for them, because what sales leaders cared about pre-COVID and what sales leaders care about post-COVID, there's a little overlap, but they're very different. A lot of people are remote selling as opposed to field selling. So there's a level of complexity that goes into that. So you want to pivot the buyer persona for them and enable them to do that, which motivates them as a result. Train on counters, on objections. I have talked to, I can't say how many leaders where I say, hey, rank the following things for me. Process, how good you are internally at this. Process, internal politics, coaching, etc., and tactical. Every single one of them, without fail, puts tactical last. As a leader, account executive, or SDR, if you don't know how to counter an objection, you need to find a way to know how to do it. And in that case scenario, once you do, you need to find a way to flush it out to your team. So you should not, I repeat, not relinquish the responsibility to have a perspective on something and to find what works for your team and push that onto your team and make them figure out how to do it, and then say like, oh, well, I'm going to coach them on, what accounts you're calling into and how often are you calling on that account. I would say one of the best things that I ever did in my career is I understood like, hey, I'm pretty tough to work for. I am, nicknamed the Snow Queen oftentimes internally, of like excellence without compromise is my standard, of like we always need to be pushing the needle, we always need to be learning, we always need to be putting our ego aside, which is tough to do. And so I raise a standard up there. But if I had to guess why I have had 0 voluntary churn internally, it is not because I'm a nice person necessarily, but because I found what really works in terms of tactical messaging, and I trained my reps through it. So even if they didn't love, like all of the let's innovate, and let's always push the needle, they knew that they could come, as a source of training and a source of perspective to me for things that work. So I was monomaniacal about trying to find, if I didn't have an idea of something that would work, I would go to trainers or third-party websites like this and find ideas and get my best shot on goal on instinctually what would work, and then I would deploy it through my reps, and then if it didn't work, then it was my idea. So you need to develop as a leader a perspective on something that will work when someone says, I'm not interested, and then hold your reps accountable to the deployment of that, but don't leave it on these reps, and say like, I'm going to coach them on this pipeline, blah, 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 but I'm not going to coach them on this hook. Like that is the bread and butter to me of a leader that can really make a difference. So I'd say it's no problem if you don't know tactical that well, myself included. Like especially at the beginning, I was like, I don't know how to counter this thing. So I just went all in on research, third-party training. I found every single training asset out there, and I thought, if these don't work, I need to find something that does work. So I would be very intentional about that, but training them on the counter to these objections. This is one of the main things through COVID with my former team that really earned their respect of like, I'm going to train you on all of these objections that are coming up during COVID. They're probably going to be the following: layoffs, budgets are being slashed, consolidation, scared, CFO, etc. This is how I think we should counter them. I'm going to train them on that. And then most of it worked, some of it didn't. And so we adapted in those case scenarios, but really making an effort on training them. Pulling accounts that are in affected industries for them. That's how you can enable them. So if you have this luxury, if you're selling into, let's say, recruiters or community workspaces during COVID, if you have the luxury of an expansive TAM and you can pull those out, I would suggest doing so you can be cognizant and aware of the situation where they're at. Unless you truly are a dire need during something like COVID, I would be very introspective about that. But if you say like, hey, we want to leave these recruiting companies alone for now, I would pull the accounts for them. So you're motivating them through action for them. Be okay with their objections being more real than ever. So I would, for them, track and monitor the results of these objections, like layoffs, etc., and track the number of deals that are pulling for legitimate reasons. But basically, the tracking of this and understanding, I want to be very, very diagnostic and data driven on what the impact is here for my reps, so that it's much less of a hearsay and a feel. But like, I want to track, against like, how many objections am I getting, pre-COVID that I am post-COVID? Was there a spike? What was the level of spike? Can I track that in my conversation intelligence software? So I can put legs to, okay, there is some level of difference. How do we counter that and make the best of the situation? And how do we also give some level of reprieve to the reps? Because there is some level of influence, no matter what the business of COVID. You just want to make sure that you get their head in the right mindset and you track against the thing and measure what that real impact is. And the last way you can enable them and motivate them by doing so is giving them out of the ordinary help. So jump on the phone with them, send referrals through, build new sequences to enable them, but basically say, how is there a way that I can jump in the trenches with them so I can help bridge this gap? So I did heavy referrals of like, I'm going to go book meetings for them, not only to show them that it can be done and to do the rah-rah speech, but so I can pass them over and we can group win. Now let's talk about motivation through training. This is a heartthrob for me, is how do you train people? Because this is extremely motivating for people. On a side note, when I hear people that are interviewing with me and they're like, hey, I'm at this good company, yeah, it's a hypergrowth product, whatever, we're about to IPO, etc., they don't train me. I got the first training of, like, what are these buyer personas and what does our company do? But past that, they didn't train me on how to handle this cold call objection or this emailing thing. So where they are spending the lion's share of their time is messaging outreach, messaging strategy, voicemails, follow-up emails, etc. And so again, I cannot stress enough that you need to, especially if you're an SDR leader or you're an account executive leader, you need to find out what works. That is the lion's share from my view, especially within the messaging view. That is the lion's share of your job, is figuring out what actually works and then training them to do it and driving up adoption through identifying where they're struggling. So I've seen a lot of account executive leaders, for instance, that jump on every single call. It's like they jump on every call and they like quarterback the deal across the line. It's like, even if the deal is closed, from my perspective, you're exposed at that point of like, hey, yeah, this deal closed, but really the test of a great leader is when they leave for a month, how does the team perform? What's the accountability look like? What does the motivation look like? And can they do that without them? So, I saw a video once of a trainer that basically he went in and he was training these people and he basically, was going over buyer persona or whatever. And he said, queue up your prospects so I can call them. He calls one of their prospects live and he books the meeting and he records it and he puts it online. And I'm like, all you just showed me is that you know how to do it. But the litmus test on whether you're good at training, leading, etc., is how well that person who you're training can do it. So all I know now is that you know how to do the skill set, but arguably they didn't bring you in because you know how to prospect. They brought you in to teach other people how to prospect. So point being, story's over. Point being, for leaders, you need to be metriced and monomaniacal at understanding what actually works and then how can I train people accordingly. I think a bug just jumped on me, but I'm going to keep going anyway. So what can you train them on? Number one, technique. 2, specific objection handling. We're all getting about the same objections. If you want to hear more, go into the core sessions and I talk all about objection handling, but not interested, send me an email, running into a meeting. What are the specific objection handles that my rep should do in those cases? Product training, competitive differentiators. It sounds like a duh, but I have run into a number of orgs who don't have it, so you need to be intentional about that. Buyer persona training to be an account executive. Your SDRs are going to get really motivated by this of, maybe they want to know how to demo, et cetera, so that they can think about that role once they move on. Individual training catered to their strengths and weaknesses. So this is in one-on-one. So, I pitch the system and then I want to identify through a conversation intelligence platform or a sales engagement platform, where are they having hiccups and which one of these are motivation pieces and which one of these are educational pieces, because there's going to be both. And then third-party training. I always like to bring in someone third-party. This is not a plug for me. I always like to bring in as a leader third-party training because it's kind of like a fun field day for people, and it shows that I'm investing in them. If nothing else, if they don't even learn anything, that is the point of training, full disclosure, you should hold every trainer to that of whether their methodology works and whether people understand the methodology once they left. But it is a quick win for the org regardless of like, oh, okay, like they value me enough to bring in this person to talk to me about objections. Motivation through cross-collaboration. This can be super motivating for reps, is knowing that they're not just in it alone. Number one, building a cross-culture collaboration with team in the comments. So within conversation intelligence softwares like Chorus, for instance, there's a way to leave comments on different calls. And so not only can you, as a leader, leave comments for your reps, you can infuse a culture where AEs are leaving comments for other AEs, of like, great job, man, that was a really good hook. Or AE to SDR, where they say that was a great qualifying question that you asked, or good elevator pitch, or you could work on this, or etc. SDR to AE of like, hey, there's a heads up for your meeting later at 2 p.m. This is what the prospect said in terms of timeline, or SDR to SDR where they're really in the trenches. But all of this can cause a cross-collaboration culture that can make people feel like they're not so alone, so they start to get motivated that this is a team effort, not just them by themselves. Increase one-on-ones and visibility with leadership. This is a big one. And I'm not talking about the annual SKO. I'm talking about you reward people with visibility with leaders. So I remember whenever I earlier this year did the Flip the Script tour, our CEO, Roy Renani, at the time actually came and spoke on the tour. Thanks, Roy, if you're watching this. And he was on stage, and I told him very briefly, I said, yeah, so this rep, Rob Camardo, shout out Rob if you're watching, sorry if you didn't want me to mention this, but Rob not only like helped set up for the session, I had several SDRs on tour to help with the logistics, et cetera, and keep the flow moving. And he set up for the session, and then he went back to the hotel, and he crushed out like 60 dials. He was like, no one's going to stay in my way of like, I'm doing this tour, but I'm still metriced on numbers. And so he wanted to do both. So he booked 2 meetings while he was at the hotel before he went up to the session. I told Roy goes on stage and he mentions it. He was like, yeah, so for instance, we're talking about unicorn reps. Rob went home to this hotel, or went back to this hotel, like how I called hotel home, someone who's on the road a lot. He went back to his hotel, he crushed these dials, he booked 2 meetings, and I could tell, Rob was glowing. He was like, okay, my CEO now really knows something that I did positively. So if you can reward them, I've done this multiple times, and the reaction is always amazing of like, hey, top performer this week, kind of like lunch with a teacher kind of thing. Top performer this week gets an hour with our CRO. Whatever they want to cover in that time, don't be nervous, leaders, of like whatever they want to cover in that time, whether that's messaging or account strategy or picking their brain on their background, but rewarding them through someone internally. Not only does it bridge the gap between upper level management and these individual contributors, but it really motivates both parties, gives the CRO a taste of someone on the front lines, helps give them a good view of people that might be aspiring into leadership roles, and also catches the individual contributor on fire. Number 3, email channel for response emails. If you want to, I have done this in the past and it's worked very well for me. A lot of the headway that you can make is on response emails. So people do a lot of work to find the right person at the right company with the right data, the right email address, and the right phone number, and then they finally get a hold of them and someone gives them an objection or a response. Sometimes the objections are real, sometimes the objections aren't real, and how do you counter each one of those? So it's very subjective to each situation. There are some outlined rules if you want to know more. If you go into season 2, I think it's episode 5, where I talk about how to shatter or how to figure out whether an objection is real or shallow and how to counter both of them, what to do in both case scenarios. But in terms of cross collaboration, I created a Slack channel where these SDRs would post their responses. And my initial idea at the onset was, I want a quick way to help them respond to these emails. But what it ended up causing is all of these SDRs are going into the channel and they're starting to cross-collaborate together. My idea would be this, Beck's in a meeting, so, what about this? What about this? What about this? And all of a sudden I'm like, they were actually pretty right. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to step out of this situation, and what I, built as a parachute is now actually a jet. So I'm like, that's great. Both achieved my goal. So it caused this culture of like, what do you guys think? And so it really infused cross collaboration, especially in a remote environment. Number 4, daily check-ins with the team. I would say limit these if you're going to do them to 15 minutes just to do a check-in to make sure everyone's on the same board. Weekly film reviews. Another great example of people coming together so they feel like they're a part of a team and they can review calls together. And then the last one, SDR buddies. So if you're onboarding remotely, my heart goes out to you. I have a session on it in the sales enablement section on how to do it remotely. But SDR buddies is an idea when you have an SDR who's onboarding and you pair them with someone who is tenured as an SDR. You can do the same for account executives. And you basically not only pair them together in terms of mentorship, but you can pair them against one another and say like, hey, pair number 1 verse 2 verse 3, whoever gets their SDR buddy, who's onboarding to book the first meeting, both get $500. So all of a sudden you'll see them really investing, but this causes, especially from the onset, they're very used to their peers in terms of the people they know. So you want to cause that cross collaboration very early in your org, not only to drive cross collaboration, but make sure that the people that are onboarding feel the positive effects of that they are valued from the first step in the door of your org. So now let's talk about motivation through SPIFs. So SPIFs, for anyone who hasn't heard of it, it stands for Sales Performance Incentive Funding Formula. Bet you didn't know that. I actually had to look that up a couple months ago. I'm like, what does it actually stand for? But SPIFs is a way to motivate your team with basically some extracurricular wins to get a short-term initiative or long-term initiative achieved. So I'm from Texas. My mom, full disclosure, she said there's 2 things that you need to instill to get someone moving. Number 1, the keys and promise to the kingdom if they do well. And number 2, the threat of the fiery gates of hell behind them to make sure that they get on the path. So let's start with the keys to the kingdom. These are 5 different examples of SPIFs that I have used to motivate people. Number 1, I would SPIF them for job offers. So to anyone out there who offered a job to any reps that worked with me over the last 2 years, shout out. They actually got money for it. So I wanted to drive the outcome of quality messaging. And a good indicator of that was whether people wanted to hire the reps afterwards. So not only was I not scared of that, of like, hey, if they're going to leave me, they're going to leave me. And if they leave me, shame on me, not shame on them. So I need to be focusing on driving such a great program that people don't want to leave, right, in terms of training. But in terms of quality, I'm like, I wanted to have the reps, especially because I've sold into salespeople, I wanted to have the quality of rep that people really, really craved. So I would SPIF them and give them $100 every single time someone offered them a job, whenever they were doing cold outreach. Number 2, SPIF for a great job plus a meeting. So if someone responded over email and said, hey, great job with the cold outreach, again, we were gathering a lot of low-hanging fruit on personalization. So we were really breaking into that. If you want to know more, go to the Personalization at Scale session that's in the core sessions. Also, I just launched a partnership with Reggie where I am dumping putting all of the methodology, flip the script methodology into Reggie. Shout out Matt Millen, and flushing that into outreach that you can do at the click of the button. Shout out Manny. But if you are looking to do personalization, if you are doing personalization, you're going to get a lot of people who are like, that was the best message I've ever seen because you actually knew who I was. So the reaction usually is pretty stunning from our prospects whenever you lead with integrity and lead with that quality kind of outreach. So I was spiffing them on if their prospect responded with, hey, that was a great outreach effort, that was a great cold call, plus they gave them the meeting, then I would give them $100. The third way that you can spiff them is activity, spiffing their activity with a raffle. I usually am not a big fan of effort spiffs, meaning I want to spiff for outcome. Hence, in number 2, they have to get the meeting, not just the great job. But with activity, I would typically do, this is an input spiff. So basically, I would say like, hey, for the email metric is 35 completely personalized emails per day plus 52 dials per day. any email that is personalized over 35 and over 52, I will give you a ticket of entry into this raffle. Make the prize, you have 3 prizes a month, and then they can increase their odds from a positive perspective of going over on the activity if it was personalized. Number 4, I would spiff with third-party training. Again, I'm not saying this so that you hire Flip the Script, but a great way in the past is third-party training is expensive, and you have to actually put some investment into that. So I wanted to invest in people as a leader that were investing back in me in terms of their outcomes. So you could put a spiff of, if you exceed 150%, or if you exceed 100% of quota, or you can set the metric wherever, 125%, then for 2 months back to back, I will give you a training with a third-party trainer of your choice. And then number 5, SQO, SQL, and SAL contests. So to anyone who thinks I use too many acronyms, I absolutely agree with you, but I don't know any other way to say it. SQO is going to be a sales qualified opportunity. SQL is a sales qualified lead, and an SAL is a sales accepted lead. I've heard companies use all 3, but basically, if getting appointments is the leading indicator that are qualified for you knowing that your funnel is successful, if that's a leading indicator, then you can run a contest of saying, hey, the AE SDR pair who gets the most sales accepted leads or sales qualified opportunity in the month of, whatever, May or April, they're going to get X amount of dollars. So not only do you get them to be motivated to get the most qualified opportunities that they can, but you motivate the pair to work together. So now let's talk about being in trouble. Motivation through the negative repercussions. So again, to quote my mom, you do need the keys to the kingdom and the threats of the fiery gates of hell behind someone to get them motivated. So let's talk about accountability and repercussions. This is not where I'd start, but is absolutely necessary. You need to have a level of discipline. Ask someone who draws outside of the lines all the time to help get them motivated in the right direction. So number 1, I would put the negative repercussion of you set an activity, minimum of this is the expectation in terms of emails, in terms of quality or quantity that you should be sending and dials you should be making per day. And if they don't hit that, then I typically have said with my teams of, hey, I'm sick of having this conversation. This is the activity minimum. If you don't hit it, you have earned yourself a meeting with not only your frontline manager, but me, and the VP of Marketing, and the CRO, and the CEO. And you can explain to us for 45 minutes why you didn't hit that activity minimum. Clean my team up overnight. No one wants to be on the line with their CEO and CRO saying that they didn't put in the effort. So this is always within reason. If people are sick, if people are on PTO, obviously you would not put this in place. But this helped overnight drive accountability with my teams of I'm not going to get mad. You're just going to have to face that gauntlet, and I would not want to be in that gauntlet. And so, my teams as well. And so, putting that in place actually helped with the negative reality of people not hitting the activity minimum. Number 2, keep one-on-ones to the same topic if they haven't mastered it. Sometimes people, reps will, they are struggling with something, and you will sit there in a one-on-one, you'll say, hey, you need to do this thing. And if you are an effective learner, typically you can only handle 1 to 2 things. So to all the coaches out there, I would focus on 1 or 2 improvements, not 15, so that they can remember. And sometimes the issue is they didn't know how to do it. Sometimes it was an educational issue. Sometimes it was a reinforcement issue that they, need it to be reinforced several times before they understand it. And sometimes the issue is they just didn't want to do what you told them to do. So again, take it from a girl who doesn't like to be told what to do. I think most entrepreneurs fall in that bucket, if I may. But in the case of the one-on-ones, if you notice that someone isn't doing something and you don't think it's an acumen issue and you don't think it is they don't know how and they're struggling with deployment, then I would continue to keep my one-on-one on the same topic. Last week we talked about being more brief. Your emails this week were not more brief. Tell me why. And open up the floor. And I would try and do it non-accusatory, maybe lighten my tone of what I just said, but can you give me some background? Why don't we make that happen? And so I listened to, the quote unquote narrative, but essentially I would continue to stay on that topic in the one-on-one until they chose to improve it. And if they continue to not be accountable for that, and they're like, I'm digging my heels in here, then you need to go to, alternate means. But most people will clean up their behavior of like, hey, I want to spend my time wisely as a leader. I'm going to teach you on a different technique item. And if the issue is not education and the issue is not that you don't understand, like that case scenario, I will dig in I will help enable all day long. If the issue is you don't believe in it or you don't want to do it or you're too lazy, etc., the next week 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're going to talk about why you're not doing this, because that is going to be your issue. So any kind of program in terms of education, you don't start with calculus. You start with addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and it is a building mechanism. So if they're not mastering, these first ones because of an accountability issue and an attitude issue, I would help them refocus their attitude that I have needed in several different case scenarios. I would help them adjust their attitude by continuing to stay on that addition and saying, like, we're going to stick here until we master this or until you decide to deploy it. Number 3, I would pull the one-on-ones if they're not prepared. Now you know why they call me the Snow Queen. One-on-ones are a mutual two-way road, two-way street. So if I'm taking the time to prepare for a one-on-one by listening to your calls and identifying where you're messing up and trying to help you in terms of subject lines or emails or brevity or 7 pillars or etc., and I'm really investing in those one-on-ones, which that's what really enriches them. If they come to the deck, I would always give a couple of items that the rep has to invest in. So I'm not just going to shelf out everything without, payment all the time. You need to come prepared in terms of the time that you invested, what you want to learn. It's actually really tough to ask great questions. To ask great questions, it means that you need to have deployed the material, you need to have deployed it pretty regularly, and that you're running into things that you don't know how to do. And you have to be actively thinking, taking your accountability and future into your own hands by saying, like, I think that this thing is what's holding me back, that I don't know the answer to this question, so I need to ask this person. So I've seen a lot of speakers that love the AMA, Ask Me Anything, Q&A, da-da-da, and they're like, oh, I just love those. I'm like, well, yeah, you don't have to prepare for it. And the audience has to do all the work. So point being, in the one-on-ones, I have had, there's been times, unfortunately, and again, I've done all of this, that's why I know this list very well, where someone has come unprepared. Maybe they didn't show up on time, maybe they didn't prep what I asked them to, maybe they didn't deploy what I asked them to in step number 2. So if they do that, egregiously, if I'd say, like, I'm not mad, but I'm pulling this time and I'm giving myself the hour back, because I'm not going to sit here and invest and try to coach on something whenever you haven't prepared what I asked you to. So a great example of that is response emails. So response emails are very hard to track and surface within the CRM of what is a response email to the first cold outreach. I won't go into the operational perspective, but your rep knows you don't know what they don't know, to some degree. You can get there through testing, et cetera, and reinforcement, but you want them to bring to you the response emails that they have top of mind that they really don't know how to counter. So if they're not willing to dig and do that, then I would just pull the one-on-one and say, I'm not mad. The less emotional that you can be about this, I would say the better objective of I'm not mad, but I'm pulling this one-on-one, because I didn't see you do the prep work. See you later. Number 4. Pull postbound if they're not calling on the accounts. So postbound leads for everyone in review. Inbound is going to be true demo requests and a hand raiser and someone who come in through a chat box like Drift. I know I mentioned them a lot. They're a great company though. Outbound is going to be cold. They don't know who your company is at all. And postbound is going to be everything in between. So this is going to be content downloads, webinar registrants, event attendees, etc. But basically everything in between those two realities. If they are not calling on these people, if they are not calling on the webinar attendees that marketing spent a lot of time and money to get to deck, and they are not calling on them in an appropriate time manner, or they are not calling on them at all, if they hit ICC and ICT, ideal customer title and customer company, I would pull them from them. And then the last one, kind of in this same vein, is number 5. For the account executive team, I usually give them a pooled bag quota of, let's say they have an SDR that's supporting them. That SDR has a meeting quota of 12. I would assign the account executive a small meeting quota of 3. And I would say, hey, you can get there through either from one of two means. Either your SDR booking the meeting or you self-prospect the meeting. So the quicker way is that you invest in the SDR and you coach them on how to get better so that they can book meetings for you. That's the better way, because it's the better way for your org overall and for the SDR. But if you just want to carry this thing across the line and you want to close all of these deals plus self-prospect 15 meetings, there's the option to do that, but most people don't have the time and there's no sense in doing that. So I would give them, again, the quota of the SDR has 12 meetings. I have 3 meetings as an account executive. And in terms of the negative repercussion, I would say if you don't hit a 50% minimum of that meeting quota, so you had 15 in the example, so 7.5 would be the minimum. So I'd say if you don't hit 8 meetings per month, either through the SDR prospecting or you self-prospecting, then I'm going to pull the inbound line from you entirely. So I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not upset. But basically, you're going to have the exact same bag in terms of an account executive, which is pretty aggressive. It was predicated on SDR support being involved, and you're going to have to carry the entire thing yourself. So I would pull not only demo requests and the inbound line, but also pull their SDR outbound support and just send those meetings to other reps for a month. So I actually have to give credit to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the one who came up with this methodology, and so I'm just, as usual, a pawn in their game. So that is it in terms of motivation. So now let's talk about how to keep your reps accountable. Very tough to do yourself and very tough to do to other people, especially when remotely. But high level, I would focus on 3 things before I go into this. High level, I'd focus on 3 things. Whenever you're trying to lose weight, for instance, you want to focus on 3 things. Number 1, the inputs. Number 2, the outputs. And number 3, is there just some kind of Herculean effort, aggressive thing that I can do here? So for someone who's trying to lose weight, if you only focus on the inputs and you don't focus on the outputs, then you are in a better space than the vice versa. But you are essentially saying, I'm going to only focus on my diet and I'm only going to focus on my working out. And I am not at all focused on what the scale numbers are. So you want them to, by code, you want to be looking at what is the result of these actions. These are the actions that I think will lead to the outcome, but I'm not positive in weight loss or sales of like activity, quality of activity, calling the right person. I think that these are the inputs that will lead to someone hitting a quota, but I always want to measure the output. Is this successful against the goal that I want it to be successful against? If you measure the outputs and not the inputs, I can look at the scale all day long, but it's not going to change unless I change my diet or, my exercise regimen. So it's like you need to think about both. And then there's also, there's always this third category of what Herculean efforts can I do, especially in a time like a pandemic, to just get them there, and push some kind of result that I need to. So let's start with inputs. The inputs that you can hold them accountable to are the following, or these are the ones that I personally have done. Number 1, activity minimums. 2, added prospect minimums of the amount of people they need to add in sequence, because it's a leading indicator and something they'll need. Number 3, hunting premises in the top 3 buckets. If you want to know more about the personalization buckets, if you go to Personalization at Scale, but there's 5 buckets, and I rank them in order of where you'll see trigger rates. But oftentimes bucket 1, 2, 3, because they're a high trigger rate, means they're a little bit more difficult. So I need to measure, one of the best things that I ever did for my team is starting to measure, are they staying in those top 3 buckets? Or are they taking it easy on themselves and going to bucket 4 and 5? So I could recoach them on how to get to buckets 1, 2, and 3. Number 4, are they doing research before their cold call? Are they personalizing? Big personalization girl here. Number 5, are AEs doing research before the discovery call? Seen a lot of AEs jump on the line and say, tell me about your business. It's like, you should know about my business. You are on a discovery call. You should have done your research. You should arguably know my competitors or how this meeting came about. or what I would care about in terms of buyer persona or things that I've done. But I would ensure that my AEs are doing research before discovery calls. It's a big accountability item. Are they sending follow-ups, both SDRs and account executives? Are they running people through the entire sequence? This is hard because a lot of people, the glamour of the first email, you'll get a lot of trigger there, but the strength of a sequence typically lies at the latter stage part of the sequence. So you need to make sure that they're running them through each one of the steps, especially my sequences, because they're more activity heavy on the back end. So you want to protect the integrity of that sequence and protect that people are having one solid user buyer journey and they're not going from step 1 on day 1 to step 2 on day 35. So it messes with the results of the sequence. Are they reaching out quickly? This is more so for inbound lines, with the 5-minute clip, that research shows that if you wait more than 5 minutes to reach out to someone, then your results will decline massively. If you want a quote-unquote better, I would argue better process on inbound of how to convert them, then I covered that in season 1 of how you can get them to schedule on the site. You don't have to use an inbound BDR. Really exciting, but I can't go into it right now. Number 9, running a no-show sequence. No-shows are really prevalent and they are crippling to the industry, especially on cold calls. You'll get more no-shows, at least in my experience, on cold calls than you will on emails, because emails, if they didn't want to take the meeting, just wouldn't respond. Cold call, they might feel some pressure, so I would have my reps run an aggressive no-show sequence, and it's a value sequence. If you want to add value along the way, not just check in and not put heat on them, but say, hey, I saw this article, saw this thing, so that it bumps up the likelihood that they know you're invested and you're ready for the meeting, so it makes them harder to ghost you. Full disclosure, the best company I've seen who runs the best process on this, hands down, is Drift. Kate Adams, if you're watching this, she is absolutely lethal over on the Drift team. The process that I went through whenever I was talking to them one time, I'm like, this is the best process in terms of no-show. Like, I would never have the gumption. You made it extremely hard on me to not show up. So shout out to Drift. They have a lethal no-show sequence that they run with using their software, by the way. Number 10 in input, buyer persona memorization. Are they pitching the right buyer persona value prop to the right person in the right case? Competitive memorization. Do they know your competitive feature differentiators? Number 12, the usage of your coaching points. Can you hold them accountable to deploy the coaching that you gave them? And then number 13, methodology adoption. Full disclosure before we go here, I have a session that is extremely exciting, at least for me. I believe it's number 23, episode number 23, on how to uncover if a methodology is actually effective. Gulp. Training industry, gulp. And then double down if it is. So I go into how you can measure whether someone's methodology is actually working for you, and then double down if it is, and get rid of it if it isn't. So, but once you uncover that your methodology is actually working, you want to hold them accountable to the input of them adopting it. So this is very tough, especially when we're talking sellers, full cycle sellers, or people who are closing, because I think the saying goes, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can, but you got to track it, and it can be difficult because we're all used to our ways. So for the betterment of the team, I would figure out whether your methodology works, and then I would track in terms of inputs against it. Let's talk about outputs now. So inputs, we were thinking about, are we eating enough vegetables? Are we eating too many calories, too few calories? Are we drinking enough water? Are we working out enough? Accountable to outputs is, are we losing weight? Are we gaining muscle? Are we getting the goal as a result of those inputs that we really want? And if not, we need to rehash and refocus on the inputs and change them. So the outputs are pretty simple. SDR meetings book, SDR influence ACV, or average contract value. AE self-prospected meetings, this is a big one for accountability, is that they're self-prospecting as much as you need. AE discovery calls held, are they holding enough discovery calls? AE POC or trial, negotiation, volume of closed won deals, or net ARR off of those closed won deals. But this is pretty easy. I would pick the goal that they're quoted on, and then pick 3 to 4 leading indicators within the sales cycle or the SDR prospecting piece that lead to those outcomes, those outputs, and I would measure against them. So these are all outputs centric, and then the inputs are the ones that cause those outputs. but I would multi-tier out and say, what are the leading indicators and is the main goal? And then how can I measure against both of them so I can be diagnostic on where I need to fix it? And then the last one, how do you be Hercules through your efforts? I need to get a life. Okay, 10 of these. 10 of these of things that I've done. When COVID hit, full disclosure, I'm like, I need to get them there. I need to find a way. So I did all of the accountability stuff that I just showed you. I pivoted our sequences. I added in push-pull. I pivoted our buyer persona. I put in a bunch of different postbound sequences. I doubled down on referrals, etc. And it worked. It really worked. It took a lot of work, but I mean, more so to highlight the team, the last team that I was working with. COVID hit in roughly March, or really that's when the US started to lock down. April, we had the best month we had ever had as an org. May, we also had the best month we'd ever had as an org. Again, June, we did the same thing. In July, we did the same thing. So during COVID, we found a way to actually notch up. And our inbound line was actually communicating to us, it dipped. So it's communicating to us that before you tell me that I worked for remote, web conferencing, et cetera, like conversation intelligence software that helps remote sellers, our inbound line was actually decreasing. So it's communicating to us that the market was actually less ready for our software, and outbound found a way to notch up each step of the way. So I did it through, what I've aforementioned before. But in terms of accountability, there were some things that I did that I would never want any SDR leader to hear. But we're going to go into them now of what I did. I'd coach more than normal. I'd refer more than normal. I found deals for them and sent them through. I book meetings myself and give it to the reps, not only for the, I'm in the trenches with you LinkedIn post, but to actually get them some meetings. If I was an account executive leader, I would jump into deals and attend their demos. I would increase the number of sequences that you're writing. So one of the biggest things I did to enable them during COVID that was Herculean was I said, I have 5 different initiatives that I was ready to deploy. I was going to deploy them in May. I thought they were going to double maybe June. I thought they were going to double our prospecting numbers through enablement. And I'm like, well, COVID hit. So I rushed all of it up, and while my outbound funnel emptied out, this made up for it. So we somehow found a way the outbound funnel went out, but because of these efforts, we gradually got better. So I would start, enabling them through writing more sequences or enabling them with more angles, not just whipping the same horse, so to speak, if you're from Texas. Number 6. Increase activity number and prospects added. I'm not going to say this twice because this is where most people's head actually goes. Number 7, force increase quality of messaging. A way that I did this, full disclosure, if you want to know more, I would go to the coaching session in season 2 of how I'm coaching, but I insist quality. I insist quality of, on myself and on others who choose to work for me. I say hey, it's not easy to get better. Go call Michael Phelps. It's just not easy to strive to be the best. But if you are watching this session, I'm assuming it's because you want to be the best. You want to be the best version of yourself. So I would force this quality of increasing, the quality of messaging. We all stand to get better, myself deeply included. And one of the best things that I ever did was, instead of having an SDR come prepared with an email and saying what email do you want to review, I started aggregate coaching of we'll just leave you out of this. I'm going to go to your last 30 emails that you sent and briefly run through and pick up the themes. So not only do I teach you how to get email better on this email that you already sent, I teach you how to get better overall. So I would force up the quality of my messaging. Quality and quantity, arguably quality is a quicker way to get there. So, I could go into metrics, but the quicker way to get there, especially with the bar being where it's at in terms of the industry, it's pretty low right now. So you can really increase your meeting volume in terms of quality, or account executive experience too. Act of God sequence. I would build an act of God sequence if I were Charmin toilet paper. There's all of a sudden mass adoption of my product because of something that happened third party, like a pandemic. If I were Zoom, no offense to the Zoom sellers. I think I said it in one other session, and I truly mean that. I absolutely love Zoom. Shout out Eric Yuan. I absolutely loved your email to the market. I think you are brilliant in your tone and brilliant in your communication, and I'm so thankful for your software. Active God Sequence, it's not like Zoom sellers all of a sudden got 15 times better. We just needed their software. And so that the kind of sequence I would build, and I would go, in that case, this is one of the only cases, especially in B2B, that I would go all relevance. You just got to gobble up TAM. You have to get to market. So one of the ways that I would do that is by, through Herculean efforts, is developing an active God sequence. Think outside the box. I don't know what it is. Just come up with it and only focus on execution. Olivier Labby over at Metadata, he's a VP of sales. I worked for him at G2. My personal review of him is he is one of the best, if not the best, execution leaders focused on the market. He was never worried about the optics of something or the theory of something. He had an unbelievable proclivity towards knowing the outcome and driving people towards that outcome and cutting out the riffraff. I've never seen it before. Our internal meetings were 2 minutes long. Shout out, Olivier. I absolutely miss you. Call me. But you need to focus on execution and cut out all the riffraff of the shell stuff that isn't going to get you the result, but you just want to have the optics of it. So let's talk about keeping them away from blaming it all on COVID, and then we will close out. Let me just see how many tips we have here. We have 12. So the first 4, number 1, I would, to keep them away from blaming it all on COVID, the first thing I would do is enable them. We went through that heavily, but I would enable them, first thing right off the bat, so that they are less likely to say it's on this effort because they're getting so much extra juice from you. Keep them motivated. We already went over that. Focus on a game of inputs. Focus on a game of inputs. I see a lot of reps and I see a lot of leaders, before they know what the effects of COVID are already saying we should reduce our quota. We should reduce our quota because the pandemic's affecting it. The truth and the reality is COVID is going to affect most businesses, I'd argue all, to some degree or manner. However, no one's going to get anywhere by focusing on that. So you need to focus on keeping your inputs high quality, focus on keeping your teams, drilled in on that, and then see the effects on the back end. So what I did is said, don't worry about COVID. We're already talking about quota relief and we don't even know the effects of it. So I remember I had a one-on-one with the rep where they're like, well, COVID's really affecting me, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, time out. Let's call him Ben. Time out, Ben. You didn't hit your activity minimum. So arguably you didn't get meetings this week because you didn't call people. So let's focus on that first, and let's think about the inputs, and then we can talk about the outputs on the back end. So I would get them focused on a game of inputs, get them to maintain quality and actually push quality during a time like this to do something about it. Dig into the numbers in the trenches with them, be very evaluative, be very data-driven, and get into the trenches with them. So evaluate what's real and plan around it, and evaluate what's not and just needs attention. So there's going to be 2 kinds of things during COVID. This stuff that actually is real, deals are pulling because of this objection, and I need to plan around it. And then there are going to be things that are not real, like I'm not hitting my numbers because of COVID whenever I didn't make any dials this week. So you need to figure out which one's which and how to deal with both of them. Number 5, pivot your quotas accordingly. This is all within what is doable for your organization. So if you're watching this video, I don't know who you are, meaning I don't know your business necessarily. So this is a broad generalization. There are some companies who can afford to pivot quotas down based on things that are happening during COVID. There are some organizations who do not have that luxury, unfortunately. So I would always say within measure, do not go out of house and home, make the smartest decision for your business. But I would pivot for what you can realistically accommodate if, we're going to go through the variables, but if, number 1, there is an inexplicable decrease with static or increased inputs. So if I have my reps making the same amount of dials or 10% more and the same quality, 20% more, and they still aren't getting to their quota, I would say, okay, this thing is probably most likely, I'm not going to run a regression analysis, but it's probably because of COVID. And so I can't take the heat off, this quota entirely. Like, I'm a leader, and I don't think it would be good for the reps if I did. But I can lessen the bag by 80% to accommodate. So I would want to know the impact by focusing on the inputs, making sure that they're static, arguably 10% more, and then measuring what happens on the back end and adjusting accordingly. But I would not do that before I had the data of what I realistically thought that the impact of it was. So keep the input static or increase them a little bit and then see what happens on the back end. I would adjust quotas on number 2 on real objections. So I would monitor how many objections I'm getting on the cold call lines of, that were real ones. Layoffs, budget cuts, budgets being slashed, et cetera, no tech, consolidating tech, et cetera. And I would adjust quotas accordingly. But you want to be very public to your reps that you're doing this. We are going to insist quality, we are going to insist the level of activity, and then we are going to be data-driven and understand what is the real impact. So both of those communicate to your rep that you are a solid leader in your objective because you want the data point first, you want to push them no matter what, and then you are also willing to bend and see what the result is on the back end. So the people who are all about like, oh, it's COVID, so let's release the quotas, you are maybe in some case scenarios unnecessarily releasing the quotas just so your reps can stay in their sweatpants, which damages your org overall. The other leader who only insists quality and doesn't give the reprieve, you look a little bit unfair and unrealistic of like, okay, I'm not going to try to work for this person anymore or really drive because they're not listening to me. They're not hearing me and they're not being objective with this data. So I would pivot based off of real objections, the volume of them and the quality of them. I would pull down the quota based on deals pulling. So this is for account executives. If there is a lot of deals pulling, I can think of one in specific that happened at our last org, and they had found value in it. They were just like, look, we're just not doing, discretionary spend right now. Like, we are going to stick with a complete freeze. So what to do in the meantime? I have a session on 9 ways to continue to stay top of mind, buyers who stalled in Q1. I believe it's session 8. Or episode 8 within season 2, if you want some tips on that. But point being, I would adjust the quota based on deals pulling. I would adjust the quota based on you pulling their book. There are going to be some industries that you're going to have to pull from them, or you should if you have the luxury, HR, recruiting, community workspace, et cetera. I don't want to be blowing up WeWork and Industrious right now trying to push my luxury spend software. They were very, very impacted by COVID. So if you're going to pull some accounts out of their book and you don't have accounts to make up for it, then I would reduce the quotas accordingly. Adjust based on postbound decrease. Again, that's webinar attendees, event attendees, or content downloads, anything between true inbound hand raisers and true outbound where they don't know you at all. If you see a decreased volume from marketing, then I would say okay, I need to reduce the SDR quota because we're giving them less support, or at least find a way to make up for it. Adjust based on discounted pricing. This is not discounted pricing that your AE did on their own behalf. This is discounted pricing that you rolled out a new pricing and you wanted to keep the same revenue, like the same revenue quota. So if I discount pricing from 15K ACV to 10K ACV for my deals, and you think that that's the only way people are going to buy, then I would have the gumption to say, or the courage to say, I'm going to reduce their quota from, 100K to 80K, because if they book the same amount of deals and have the same amount of effort, which they typically are, because they were the same deals, but I'm as a policy telling them to charge less, then I need to wear that decision on my chest in terms of, I'm going to reduce their bag. So you will earn a lot of rapport that you are saying, hey, reps, we're going to focus on what we can control, but I also am going to listen to you, and especially if I ask you to discount pricing, I'm going to adjust accordingly. Just based on a free product, a lot of people giving a product away for free, hey, during this time, we want to get users in the platform. That is the sales strategy right now. Quick tip on that, if you're going to do that, no one ever upgrades with Pandora. So be cognizant of, I would send them through red lines and make sure that they go through a contractual agreement that if you hit this criteria, given COVID lifts or whatever you want to put in there, that they would buy in month 4 or buy in month 5 because, or not no one, upgrades in Pandora. Pandora, I love you. I'm obsessed with your company if you're watching this. But very few, I think it was less than 1% of their 1% of their users, including this girl, doesn't upgrade to the free, doesn't upgrade to the premium model. So LeBron James even said, like, why would I buy CDs or iTunes if I can use Pandora for free? So LeBron James is on that treadmill, pumping out on a side note, listening to Pandora and listening to commercials as a result. But if you're going to make your product free, you need to adjust your quota accordingly for your reps. And again, I understand there are reps that are like, hey, you need to reduce my bag. They're asking 2 questions. Will you reduce my quota? Are you going to fire people? So I understand that those go hand in hand. We can't wear all of these numbers, and a lot of businesses, especially within Silicon Valley, some of them don't have that luxury. So I would keep all of this in terms of the advice that you're taking from me right now, in mind and I would reinforce that to the reps. You're asking me about firing people, but you're also asking me for a reduced bag. And, it's simple math. So we need to have an attitude adjustment or a conversation. You need to enter into my shoes a little bit here, and we can make a decision together. But if you're going to make the product free as a strategy, I would suggest if I were an account executive, selling a free product, then I would expect a reduced bag. And then adjust based on inbound volume for demo requests. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So in summary, COVID has been no fun. It is a horrible thing, and I'm so sad for the global economy and just the globe in general. However, I do think there is a way to bridge the gap here for reps. And so to all the leaders out there who are having the courage to lead a team during a pandemic and trying to get them to stay motivated and accountable and trying to get them moving on their way, my heart and my props and my respect goes out to you. So I think it all really boils down to how can I, get my reps to push the volume of inputs and quality of inputs that they're putting in the game and focus there on what they can control, and then worrying about what I can't control on the back end and being realistic about that. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session and you just didn't get enough of me, if you want to go to flipthescript.co, you can see a bunch of different sessions with different sales topics there. If you really love this session, you want to help me out, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know you want to hear more of. Either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Watch out.